Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth podcast. I'm your host, Wade Borth, and in every episode, my goal is to get you to think differently about how money works and ultimately to empower you to take control of your money and your personal financing system. So today we have Todd Bookspan, a good friend of mine, somebody that was introduced to about a year ago, Todd, somewhere in that neck of the woods.
That sounds right.
We've been working together for about a year, and I was sitting there listening to him do a presentation to a group of my colleagues, and I thought, man, Todd's a person that needs to be on my podcast. So welcome to the Wade Borth podcast, Todd.
No, it's my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and to hopefully impact those who are listening.
So yeah, this will be fun. So just to give the listeners a little bit of background on you, see if I get this correct, right? So you're one of your primary business, and I know you don't do this a lot personally every day, but you have a business, mortgage, setting up mortgages for clients, correct?
Yeah. So I oversee a large mortgage team. I'm in the Phoenix, Arizona market, and, we service, about, 8, 9, 10 Western states. And so that's definitely a part of who I am and where I'm known.
And you've been doing that for how long?
Almost 25 years.
25. Yeah, 25.
I know. Come on, this is gray hair here. I just use this bright light so it makes it look like it's not quite as gray as it is.
Frosted. It's just frosted. So you have the mortgage team. You have a strategy that we use that I love, really started to embrace, called Win by Noon. Maybe explain that just real briefly to the listeners as well.
I mean, the short version of it is that, I did loans for a long time, for about almost 20 years. When I was ranked really high, I was closing a lot of loans. I was in the top 100 in the United States, but I was kind of stuck there. I just couldn't quite hit what I set out as my goal. And when I really did some time reflecting on what was getting in my way, it was that I was allowing other things to be scheduled, other people to schedule things when it was convenient for them, which was typically in the morning. And so I realized I wasn't getting my most important priorities done. And so I blocked my calendar in the morning just to do those things that I knew as a salesperson I needed to do consistently every day. And by doing that, even though the market stayed flat, there was no drop in interest rates, rates were about the same, sales were about the same, and, no big new accounts. But by doing what I knew I needed to do and doing it more consistently, I grew my business 45% in a year. I ranked in the top 25 for all loan officers in the country. And then I left the business actually to coach. And when I was coaching, I called them one of my young guns. I had a bunch of CEO friends who let me coach their top young loan officers. And this guy was just like, Coach, tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. And as a coach, you don't tell people what to do. You ask questions and help them figure out what to do on their own. And realized when I walked him through my system of what I did every day before noon, he's like, Coach, if you could package that up, I think I could win. And I was like, because he said, you won by noon. And so that was how Win by Noon was born. And, fortunate to, have grown outside of just the real estate and mortgage space into other organizations like yours. And so it's just a lot of fun. It's, just really making sure you understand what activities you need to do every day, what the results you're after, and really just recording those and tracking those, because we all know that success leaves clues.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. That success leaves clues. And so you just studied those people that were successful and said, what were they doing? And I think you have a quote in your tracker, in your book, that says 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts. Is that fair to say? Is that
absolutely right? The Pareto principle, right? I mean, we all know that it shows up everywhere. And I think it's the whole idea of, the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And I just find that all the time. It doesn't matter what industry somebody's in. Most industries, what the best people do. And then the question is, when you wake up and look in the mirror, am I doing those things? And I think you just need a system to do it. And what I tend to find is that if you're proactive doing those things instead of reacting later, you're probably going to get it done faster, more efficiently, and have more success.
Yeah. Well, and what some of the results that I've seen just by using your system is that it's made those things that I would consider, I'm going to call them drudgery, because they weren't like awful to do, but there's like, I'll put it off to a little bit later. And then when you have to do it at the end of the day, and you're forced like, hey, I want to go home, but I need to do this and this if I want to get those things done, it became very arduous, right? And now it's laid out, here are the things you got to do. And now it kind of frees up the rest of your day. So that freedom allows you to kind of, your mind to kind of come alive and be able to think, because it's not weighed down by those things that you have to do. But now you're going out and doing the things, that are, I would consider more creative, that you want to do that. Maybe it's spending time with your family. Maybe it's, going out and seeing 2 or 3 people that you really just want to spend some time with, that clients, business owners, people like yourself, whoever it might be. It kind of frees up your time because you've already organized that morning part of it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you know exactly what you need to do to hit your goals at the end of the year, And then you can break that down from annual to quarterly to monthly to weekly to daily. If you know today, this is what I need to do to hit the goal at the end of the year. And then you can just check that off the list and then go do whatever it is you need to do. Maybe that's meet with people. Maybe that's, spend time with your family. Maybe that's go for, a walk or whatever that is. And to me, it's really, use the word freedom. I really do believe that Jocko Willink, if you're familiar with him, he's an author and just a badass. I don't know if I can say that word on your podcast, but he's just a badass military guy, right? A Navy SEAL. And, he just basically says he's a discipline equals freedom. And at first I thought that seems really weird, but when you think about it, you just kind of nail it. If you do the things that are most important, then you can do whatever the heck else you want afterwards. And, when you know what the number is, to me, that gives me that clarity and even that higher level of freedom. And I just know when I'm not thinking about what is it I have to do, right? For you guys, especially in your version of the planner, it's spelled out in there. And the fact that you all know that the people who get the highest score in your organization have, no surprise, the highest results. And so it's not, again, you've laid out the roadmap for people to have success like you found.
Yeah. And it's like I said, it's real freeing. At first, it seems very constraining because I'm going to put my day in to do this and this. But once you have that routine and once you kind of know what you have to do, it's kind of like breathing. Once your body kind of responds and does it automatically, then it kind of frees your mind up to do a lot of different things that you don't have to do. So I've appreciated your planners and your conversations. If people want to know more about Win by Noon, just quick website, can they buy it? Can individuals buy it and subscribe to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Just go to winbynoon.com. I don't overthink things. I try to keep it all simple. So winbynoon.com, and you can put in there, there's some industry specific ones and there's a general sales version. That's the executive version. And, certainly if you have any questions, you can just ping us through the website. We'd be happy to answer those.
Well, I would recommend anybody that's looking for a efficiency process, take a look at Win by Noon, because it is, like I said, I think it can be used for everybody in any industry, and modify it to what works with you. But just knowing what you need to do to make your business successful, and you can get that done before noon, it just creates a lot of freedom. So
even if it takes till 1 o'clock, you still have a lot of freedom, right? I mean, that's, I always joke, there's people I say, I can't win by noon, but I can win by 2. And I'm like, well, how's that work for you? And they're like, oh, amazing.
Still winning, right? You're still in the winning process.
That's it, right? I mean, it's, I always joke, I'm not telling you to wake up at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. I'm just telling you that, hey, figure out what is it that you want as results, and then figure out what activities do you have to do each day in order to get that result, and just don't overthink it. Just take action and make it happen.
Yeah. It's the dribbling and, my son's in basketball and I used to coach him. It's like, just teach him to dribble and teach him to do those 3 or 4 things that will get you, in Nelson's book, Becoming Your Own Banker, he talks about, if you just do 80% of the things that we talked about, you're going to win by default.
There you go.
So like you said, if you win by 2, that's fabulous. You're still winning.
There you go. Blocking and tackling. I like that. Dribbling in basketball, blocking and tackling.
Dribbling and shooting, right? So it's the same thing. Exactly. So you do that, you do the coaching, which has benefited us tremendously. And you're also a real estate investor, correct?
I got really lucky in real estate. Steve Chater, who's obviously someone we know and someone that I look up to, and wrote the book Hold on Real Estate Investing. I was, one of the things he teaches is if you're a parent or a grandparent, invest in real estate early for your kids, and that can pay for their college. And, I absolutely consider myself an investor now, primarily because that's how I've seen my net worth grow, right? I always try to learn from people that are smarter than me. And when I got in the mortgage business and you're taking a loan application and you're learning about where people's wealth is, I found a lot of people who had normal jobs, but had abnormal high net worth because they just bought real estate with the money that they had. And so that's why I love how it matches with what you teach in an infinite banking world, because I think that there's a little bit of yin to the yang. And, I don't always tell the origin story of my investing, but I brought up Steve in that story because when I was in college, my parents said, hey, you know what, maybe instead of paying that money to live in a dorm, why don't we buy a house? And, still something that's around today. I got an FHA loan, which is a 3.5% owner occupied loan. My parents gifted me the money for it. I was a student. Guess what? I didn't have a job or income. They were the non-occupant co-borrowers. And we got a mortgage, and the rate was double digits back then. This was in the late 80s. And I had a mortgage where the 2 roommates I had paid for all but $60 of the mortgage every month. And then, guess what? They also paid for part of my utilities. And then I had that house all throughout. I kept it after I got married and moved out of the house, and I had it as a rental for years and years until I 1031 exchanged it, which is a tax deferred exchange through the IRS. And I bought property that was in Tucson, where I went to school at University of Arizona, in case there's any Wildcats listening. And then I moved back to Phoenix where I grew up, and I decided it was easier for me to have a property and manage it up here. But that was the start of me putting on that hat that said, hey, I'm going to invest in real estate.
So, you bring up a great point. I mean, I know a lot of people that have the 9 to 5 type of jobs, right? The W-2 employees that obviously want something more, but they enjoy or they're comfortable where they're at, what they're doing. And so a lot of people think, oh, I have to have a lot of money in order to be able to buy real estate. But that's not always the case, though, is it? I was just talking in just simple cases. I was talking to a young couple. They're doing IBC. They're putting money into their policies, so they have money to put a down payment on a new house. But then he brought up a program. He said, oh, through this. And he already knew what it was. So, and you probably know what it is. I'm a long ways away from being a first-time home buyer or being in that marketplace. But, they're 25 years old. And they said, oh, through this program, we can buy a house with basically zero down. And so their $12,000 that they'd saved up already inside their policy can stay there, and they don't have to borrow against it. And they're putting zero down buying a house. And
right.
Again,
I mean, that's the holy grail, right? That's the holy grail. Not every state, but most states have some type of a down payment assistance program. Veterans get zero down. If you're in a rural area, there's a USDA loan that's a government-backed zero down loan. But, big cities like Phoenix we have a statewide program in Arizona that will give someone who qualifies. You don't even have to be a first-time home buyer is the crazy part, but you can get a down payment grant. And in this market now, when we're talking where there's more inventory in the market, you can negotiate with a seller. The grant will pay part, sometimes all of your closing costs. But if not, you can negotiate with a seller to cover that. And so you can get in, with little or no money out of pocket. So think about opportunity that your client now has because at a young age, they're really smart to be doing IBC and then growing their wealth there. And then now they'll have that second asset that's growing as well.
And in his conversation, I was like, well, I should really buy a duplex and then, let that person on the other side of the place pay for my mortgage as well. I'm like, man, I said, for 25 years old, this kid was like on top of it, right? I was so impressed. But most people maybe haven't been exposed to that. I don't want to say don't understand it, don't know it. They just haven't had that conversation deep enough to know that there's a lot of things. And that's why working with a professional like yourself that understands all the programs, what's going on, is super important.
Yeah, I think so. I think the challenge is we only know what we know, right? And so you only sometimes get lucky to bump into someone like you who knows something different than maybe our parents know or our coworkers know, or our little sphere that we live in knows. And so then all of a sudden, when you think about who am I getting my advice from and then how has it worked out for them versus someone else who's has a totally different idea and strategy and how did it work out for them? And so when I look around, it's one of those things, the reticular activator, right? That part of your brain that notices things. So I always laugh because it's like, the first time I heard about it, the person said, well, remember when you wanted that, red car or whatever it was, because nobody had one. And then all of a sudden, as soon as you decide you were going to buy one, you drive down the street and you see one every 5 minutes. Infinite banking has been like that for me because, people look at me as a guy who's, been in the mortgage space and built wealth through real estate and, has insurance policies and understands IBC. So they ask me questions around it. And all of a sudden, since I've become more involved with your organization, I get the honor and the gift to chat with you guys every month, at least once a month. It's funny how often that now comes up. Even today, I was on another podcast with someone who's really big in the real estate world. And he asked me about that, hey, that infinite banking thing, again, I don't know what made him decide to ask me about that, but it was great for me to have a conversation and be able to refer over your organization.
Well, that's great because it is so powerful when we start recognizing those opportunities to be able to refer people that are within our network that are professionals in what they do. Because again, my client was talking to me about mortgages. I'm like, nope, I know my lane. That's not my lane. But here's a guy you need to talk to, right? So unfortunately, I think he lives out in Atlanta, Georgia, which is just a bit down the road from you. So
not where I'm licensed. I would say, yeah, if you're listening somewhere else and you don't know a great mortgage person, if Wade doesn't have a referral for you, then I certainly know someone who's great in that area that can help you.
And so your mortgage website, or how do they, where do they find that information? If they say, yeah, I'm in Atlanta or I'm in wherever I'm at, where can they?
They're listening here. Just bug me through Win by Noon and I'll connect you that way. That's,
okay,
that's fine. That's the easy one. But I would say the interesting thing about it is, again, you have to ask the people. If someone says, well, no, I don't know about that, then the question is, or I don't believe in that is, well, why not? Why don't you have it? Or why, you have to always know the backstory. So, again, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but I think it may be a good lesson. Oftentimes in the mortgage industry, the Dodd-Frank Act came out and we're paid the same on every loan that we do, regardless of what the product is. That's what the intention of the rule is, because what they didn't want was a loan officer to put you in a particular loan where they got paid more money because that was in their best interest and not in yours. And those down payment grant loans I mentioned, ironically, are less profitable to the bank. And so therefore, I see two things happen. One is I see that banks just choose not to offer them. Sometimes they choose to only offer one that just like there's a couple of them that we have that terms are just terrible on them. But they can say, hey, I have it. Or the third is that they actually might pay their loan officers differently on it, which, I would say maybe doesn't, their compliance department says it's good. So I question that. But the people that I follow might say, hey, that's probably not what you should do. So they've disincented the loan officer from offering it. So when someone says no, you want to know, well, why no? I mean, is it because they don't offer it? Is it because they only offer one that's so bad that no one would want it? Or are they maybe getting paid different versus, hey, do we have all of it and we embrace it? And so I think that's a perfect example. If someone said to you, hey, I don't believe in IBC, then the question is, well, why not? And my guess is they just don't know anything about it and don't have experience with it. And so I think it's one of those things to, that's what about you all. You're so inquisitive, like, hey, well, tell me more about that. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you do that? What's the why behind it?
Yeah. And I have a couple of podcasts just speaking exactly to that, right? So we have this, what I call conditioned thinking. We've been conditioned to think a certain way, do certain things a certain way. And in order to, I think, really to have success and fulfillment in life and abundance in all the circles we talk about, you kind of have to get out of that conditioned thinking, because when people condition you to think a certain way, it's particularly for their benefit and rarely for your benefit.
Funny that you say it that way. And it's like everything else. I think in this world, especially now with how split people are on opinions, like everyone thinks bad opinion, good opinion, my opinion, your opinion. I'm always interested in what someone else has to say. It may not be what I believe, but I want to hear why they believe it, what's important to them. I'm like, hey, we can still be friends. And as long as they're open to hearing why I think differently, because that's, ultimately, I think what makes the world go around. But I think when you're talking about what you all talk about, which is money's pretty important, and there are truths to that are different. And so typically what I find is when someone says, oh no, you got to go this way, it's either because it's the only way they know, or maybe it's the only way they get paid, or they just, flat out just are inquisitive, curious. I think that's really my goal my goal every year, be more curious.
Yeah. There's the saying that, we let curiosity, or jealousy kill curiosity, or people have stopped being so inquisitive. Well, why is that? And versus like, oh, they got that, so they must have, screwed somebody else. So I think there's just that, that jealousy that's killed that curiosity. So, and then, it goes back to kind of what you were saying is I'm a firm believer. I think it was what Robert Kiyosaki talked about, the three sides of the coin, right?
Yeah. And it's, again, you talked about before, Rich Dad, Poor Dad is, when I'm thinking about these different opinions, I do think about Kiyosaki.
Yeah. Yeah. He comes up with a lot of different thought processes. It's pretty amazing just because his Rich Dad had a different perspective, right? So again, if you haven't read that, if you're listening to this, I would say that's got to be, one of the number one books you should be reading, even if you don't plan to do real estate, because most people relate Robert Kiyosaki to real estate, some other things, but it's just a thought process. And the thought process is the most important thing. It's not the product you're using, but it's more the thought process and understanding what the problem is in your life, accepting that you want help in that process, in that problem, finding a system that's going to make things better, and then eventually finding the product. Where everybody wants to buy a product to make their life better, but rarely does a product make your life better. It's changing of our thought process.
I love that. That's so true. And I was actually in a room last week with Ken McElroy, who does multifamily investing, and he's one of the Rich Dad advisors. And so to hear his story about how he met Kiyosaki and how, he became a Rich Dad advisor, and ironically now owns the Rich Dad publishing series as one of the 100+ businesses he owns. It's just always interesting to hear and learn from other people. And so the fact that it, comes back to that thought process piece that you were talking about, I think is really critical.
That actually leads to something I had thought about before we got online here together. You've talked to a lot of industry leaders. You talk to people that own multiple businesses, hundreds of businesses, right? What are some of the commonalities of success? You made the point that success leaves clues, right? It leaves a trail. You said something along that line. And so if you think about it, what are some of the common characteristics of those type of people?
We've all heard that cliche that you're a total of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And what I tend to find when I see people who are an industry leader, a thought leader, is a little bit of what we've talked about. One is they've surrounded themselves with people who make them think bigger, make them think differently, and that are also not afraid to question them when they're about their thinking, right? So, they may not say I agree or disagree, but they still may say, why? Why do you think that? Why wouldn't that work? Or how could that work? They ask better questions. And I think the thought leaders also are willing to sit in a room. They may have the opportunity to get up and speak and teach, right? So I do a lot of that in the mortgage space and the real estate space. And I get to talk to people about, being more productive, about building wealth, these important things, I think, to help people lead better lives. And then I get way more, though, out of sitting in the room and I learning alongside of everyone. And so I think that's the other part of it, is I find that most super successful people are time learners. They're going to continue to figure, how do I expand my knowledge, whether it's something that's business related or maybe even something that's not business related. They just want to know more about it. I was invited to lunch. It was weird because I normally don't do things on weekends, but this past weekend with a gentleman who's considered to be one of the best people in the world from selling from stage. And in particular, he was one of the pioneers in selling like what we're doing now, like on video and through webinars. And he said, first off, it was interesting. He invited us into his home and he cooked us a meal and said, well, great, before we talk business, let's just talk and get to know each other a little bit more. And he was interested. He had something he could help us with, but he was interested also in learning about us. And so I think that's the other piece of it. I think that there's a little bit of community in doing that. And I'd say probably the last thing about that is that they also seek community out of their normal community. So for me, I get to sit in a lot of rooms that are mortgage specific, right? With the best of the best in the mortgage industry. And guess what? I learn a ton when I'm in those rooms. But oftentimes we think the same, narrow channel way. And so the rooms that I've been trying to sit in are rooms with entrepreneurs and rooms with real estate investors and rooms with, folks like you and your team, just so I can hear what other people are learning. And then I can filter that through what it is that I think, what it is that I do, and figure out how can I grow and be better.
Gotcha. So, yeah. So, I mean, you said a lot there, but there's so much truth to that, right? Those people that are super successful, I think I've heard it said too, they typically understand that they don't want to be the smartest person in the room, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because if you're the smartest person in the room, how are you going to move forward? Nelson talks about that in Becoming Your Own Banker, right? He talks about it and he calls it the arrival syndrome. He says, you want to be a person that never arrives. You always want to be that person that says, hey, I can learn more. And he says, if you do that, he says, your advancement, your knowledge and understanding is just going to.
Yeah, I just love that. And I feel like, the other thing, I guess, when you say, who are these people who are successful? I think that, a lot of them have gone really deep into what they want to be an expert on because they're super passionate about it. And then I think that when it comes to the financial side of it, the people I've seen that are most financially successful, with the exception of a billionaire who I met who said, well, you don't make as much money as I have. You're just born into it. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. But, I know a lot of people who've also grown their wealth. And what I tend to find is that they use tried and true strategies that have been successful over time that involve less risk and less gambling than people put into the other things that they do. I haven't talked to too many people who are rich because of Bitcoin. I haven't talked to too many people who are rich because of the stock market. They may have some of their wealth in those things, but they're not rich and wealthy because of it. But I do know a lot of people who have done IBC and who have bought real estate who are wealthy.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good point. If you're enjoying this podcast or know anyone else that might be interested, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and please leave a review. This will help this podcast reach and help more people by ranking higher in searches and ultimately help more people get out of financial bondage. And don't be afraid to share this podcast with your friends and family, as we can be easily found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.